The call starts like a bad joke, except nobody's laughing. A Russian soldier, somewhere in the meat grinder, asks his buddy if he has anything in reserve. Not cigarettes, not socks, not even the usual battlefield currency of instant noodles. He's asking for opioids, trimethylfentanyl, phenidone, dolafine. He says he needs something to brighten up the combat days because it's psychologically terrifying already. That's an exact quote. Hey friends, Wes here, and Ukraine's military intelligence says that type of desperation is becoming routine, driven by constant Ukrainian fire, massive casualties, arbitrary command decisions, and zero belief that anything will improve. That is the part Russia can't propaganda its way out of. You can lie about territory, you can lie about losses, you can even lie about NATO mercenaries with a straight face on state TV. You can't lie your way out of a nervous system that's breaking. And that brings us to the real story. Why opioids show up when a force starts to rot from the inside. What that says about Russia's manpower model in 2026, and what it means for Ukraine and everyone else watching a major army chemically self-soothe in real time. Now, war and chemistry have always been roommates. I'm personally addicted to these ridiculous Australian cookies that my Australian audience told me about. They're called Tim Tams. This is not sponsored, by the way. I just love these things. Thanks, Australia. Crikey! If you want a clean through line, let's start with boredom and fear. War is not constant action. It's long stretches of waiting, punctured by moments that compress your lifespan into a few seconds. Human beings aren't built for that rhythm. So the intercepted call from the Russian soldier uses a grab bag of opioid language, and it tells you something important right away. These guys aren't talking like medics with a controlled supply. They're talking like people hunting for relief by name, the way civilians talk when they've had too many nights with too much pain. Trimethylfentanyl is often used colloquially to refer to fentanyl analogs, including extremely potent variants. Methadone is also in the mix here, which matters because methadone is strongly associated with opioid substitution therapy in many countries. It's used medically, it has legitimate roles, and it's also exactly the kind of drug a desperate person might seek if they're trying to blunt the psychological distress of war. And I think that's a key distinction worth making here. Stimulants show up when armies want performance. Opioids show up when armies want escape. Stimulants say, keep going. Opioids say, make me not feel this. This is not a great sign for the Russian army as they attempt to sustain offensive operations. Ukraine's intelligence has pushed a broader narrative that non-combat deaths, including overdoses, are rising among Russian forces. Business Insider, citing Ukraine's HUR, reported figures that include 143 drug poisoning deaths in 2024 and 112 in the first half of 2025. While also noting the obvious limitation, these claims are hard to independently verify in wartime. Even if you treat every number as directional rather than precise, the trend line is plausible though. The Russian army is a recipe for misery. High casualties, coercive discipline, low trust in leadership, poor medical and administrative care, and a war that offers very few psychological off-ramps. Add easy access to black market substances and you get exactly what we're seeing. Soldiers who are trying to chemically edit reality. So why do opioids show up when armies start to crack? Well, an opioid wave in a fighting force usually means at least one of three things is happening. First, pain is unmanaged. Battlefield medicine can keep people alive and still leave them in constant pain. If a unit lacks reliable medevac, lacks proper analgesic control, or has commanders who treat injuries as moral weakness, then the informal pharmacy steps in. Second, trauma is unmanaged. Opioids do not fix trauma. They mute it for about 6 hours. In a war of artillery, drones, and constant surveillance, trauma is not an occasional visitor. It moves in permanently. If soldiers can't sleep, soldiers can't regulate fear, and they can't imagine a future, then they'll seek anything that buys a few hours of quiet. And third, discipline and supply chains are degraded. Armies with tight logistics and tight military policing can still have drug problems, but they're usually compartmentalized. Armies that are hollowed out, corrupt, and improvising tend to get the full black market experience. Drugs become a part of the informal economy. Someone always knows someone after all. Now, Russia's war structure makes all three likely. Russia has leaned hard on mobilized manpower, penal units, coerced contracts, and what amounts to an industrial approach to human replacement. When you treat soldiers as consumables, you also remove the incentives to care for them like long-term assets. And this is how you end up with soldiers asking for fentanyl analogs to get through another week in Ukraine. If you want to be clinical about it, opioids degrade the exact things Russia already struggles with. They degrade alertness, especially under fatigue. They degrade reaction time. They increase risk-taking and poor judgment in some users, and lethargy in others. They complicate command and control because impaired soldiers misinterpret orders, forget tasks, and lose initiative. They increase accidental injuries, negligent discharges, vehicle accidents, and friendly fire risks. And that is before you even get to addiction and withdrawal, which are not after-the-war problems. Withdrawal happens on the front line. A force with unreliable resupply can't guarantee steady dosing, and an addicted soldier who can't get his drug isn't merely unhappy. He's compromised, he's distracted, he's desperate. This is where the strategy picture turns ugly for Russia. An army can sometimes limp along with alcohol abuse for a long time. Alcohol is socially integrated and the effects are somewhat predictable. Opioids are different. They break the soldier's relationship with pain and fear in ways that become operationally relevant fast. In a drone-saturated battle space, the margin for error is already thin. If you're slow to react to a quadcopter buzz, you die. If you miss a warning that artillery is walking in, you die. If you forget that the road is mine because you're fogged, you die. In other words, opioids aren't just a moral or medical problem, they are a tactical self-harm. Now, Russian propaganda can fake confidence at the national level. It cannot fake confidence at the platoon level. A soldier asking for methadone isn't talking about victory. He's talking about survival, fear, and mental collapse. That call, by itself, is a better morale report than 1,000 patriotic billboards. And when morale collapses, second-order effects follow. Recruitment and retention suffer, even under coercion. Desertion pressure rises. Discipline gets harsher, which creates more stress, which drives more self-medication. Unit cohesion erodes as soldiers stop trusting each other. Officers start lying upward because admitting the truth is career death. This is how military starts to look functional on paper and rotten in practice. It can still kill people, it can still take ground, it can still launch missiles. It can also be in a slow-motion internal collapse at the human level. Ukraine's intelligence framing is designed to highlight exactly that. Russian propaganda no longer works as a morale tool in some units, and narcotics become the substitute. That's not merely dunking on Russia, it's a statement about time. Ukraine is fighting for time. Russia is spending lives to buy time. If Russian soldiers are now spending opioids to buy psychological time, that's an army burning through its human capital at multiple levels at once. If opioid use is rising among Russian troops, the next chapters are depressingly predictable. First comes normalization. More guys use, more guys trade, more commanders look the other way. Then comes institutional coping. Someone will try to control it by punishing it, which usually drives it deeper underground. Someone else will try to control it by quietly tolerating certain substances because it keeps soldiers stable. Neither approach solves the underlying cause, the war itself, and the way Russia fights it. They do what humans always do. They reach for something that changes the way the moment feels. Now, for most of history, that something was alcohol. Not because alcohol makes you a better fighter, it usually doesn't, but because alcohol makes you care less that you might die. Many governments rationed liquid courage that would make the fighting more bearable and alleviate the boredom that accompanies war. For example, Roman soldiers and gladiators drank wine before battle. The British issued rum rations to the Royal Navy. The Soviet Red Army issued vodka. The German military drank beer. Even the young American government issued alcohol during the Civil War. What kind of alcohol? Whiskey, of course. Modern industrial war added a new requirement: endurance. Not courage, endurance. The ability to stay awake, focused, and operational while your body begs you to stop. That's where the stimulants enter the chat. World War II is the canonical example. Germany's Pervitin use is widely discussed in the literature. In his book, Blitzed, Drugs in the Third Reich, author Norman Ohler describes a German war machine that was flush with cocaine, opiates, and most of all, methamphetamines, which were consumed by everyone from factory workers to housewives to German soldiers. But the Germans weren't the only European country seeking to create super soldiers through creative pharmacology. In the UK's Second Battle of El Alamein in North Africa, General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army won a decisive victory against the Germans and sent Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's troops into a retreat into Tunisia. But not many people know that General Montgomery distributed 100,000 amphetamine tablets to his troops just before the battle. American bomber pilots often had benzedrine tablets, also known as bennies, in their emergency kits for times when being especially alert was a matter of life or death. And Vietnam turned up the volume because Vietnam mixed jungle stress with institutional chaos and a massive draft-era force. Illicit drug use was a mirror of society. If morale collapses, drugs fill the gap. The same logic applies in any conflict where the individual soldier starts to believe he is expendable and leadership is either incompetent or indifferent. When the army stops feeling like a team, self-medication becomes the team. According to a report by the Department of Defense, 51% of the Vietnam-era armed forces smoked that wacky tobacco, war on drugs, marijuana. We're gonna get them terrorists. 31% use psychedelic drugs such as LSD, mescaline, and mushrooms, and an additional 28% used hard drugs like cocaine and heroin. Not often mentioned were the drugs that commanders issued to specialized U.S. units in the Vietnam War. A report by The Atlantic says long-range reconnaissance units infiltrating Laos for a 4-day mission received a medical kit that contained, among other items, 12 tablets of Darvon, a mild painkiller, 24 tablets of codeine, and 6 pills of dexedrine. The report went on to say before leaving for a long and demanding expedition, members of Special Forces units were also administered steroid injections. Then there are the conflict-specific drugs. Khat in Somalia is the famous modern example. It's local, it's accessible, it's culturally normal in that environment, and it produces alertness and a sense of boldness that can look like fanaticism to an outside observer. In Mogadishu, Somalia, American troops that I've interviewed who were involved in what's now known as the Black Hawk Down incident.
We got a Black Hawk down, we got a Black Hawk down.
Described adversaries who seem to ignore pain and keep coming. Now, whether that's khat, adrenaline, desperation, or all of the above, the point is the same. You can't evaluate battlefield behavior without acknowledging what people are putting in their bodies to keep moving. The US military is no stranger to drugging its troops either. In modern day, the US Air Force openly used the fatigue management pharmaceuticals in certain contexts because long-duration missions are a math problem. You either manage fatigue or fatigue manages you. In the Air Force, this was modafinil to go and Ambien to no-go. Modafinil is a wakefulness-promoting drug similar to amphetamines, but without many of the side effects. The French government admits to issuing modafinil to its Foreign Legion troops. The Indian and British Ministries of Defense also approve modafinil for their respective armed forces. Even the Canadian government reports that modafinil is used by its astronauts on long-term missions aboard the International Space Station. The difference between that world and Russia's world is control. A professional military tries to keep drug use inside of a doctrine-shaped box. Russia, in Ukraine, looks like it's letting drug use leak out of the box and into the mud. Then comes the post-war wave. Russia already has deep substance abuse issues. A generation of traumatized veterans returning with opioid dependency is not a social policy challenge. It is an internal security challenge. It breeds crime. It breeds corruption. It breeds radicalization. It also breeds a state in Russia that leans even harder on repression to manage the consequences of its own choices. This is where the sins of the fathers line actually belongs, and Russia wrote it for itself. Ukraine's advantage is that it doesn't need Russia to collapse in one dramatic moment. It needs Russia to degrade, to spend itself, to bleed capability at the edges until the center can't hold. When Russian soldiers are asking for fentanyl analogs to get through another day, that is a degradation you can't repair with new mobilization orders. Okay, that's it for today, my friends. Subscribing really does help the channel and helps me push back on Russian disinformation. and helps me keep Ukraine's fight at the top of your feed. So consider subscribing, and as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.